Good morning and welcome to MOTH News Live. I'm Oscar Verdi. So, how are you all today? I've lost my script. There we are. So, today we are looking at pressure points in the Irish public life, from asylum policy to environmental law, from falling investment in the technology sector to a flood crisis that is arriving long before COP30 can offer any real protection. Later in the program, we'll look at why Ireland keeps ending up in court how Later in the program, we'll look at why Ireland ends up in court over climate plans and how a single block stream in North Kerry tells a bigger story about systems that simply do not deliver. We also have a pre recorded piece from environmental specialist John Doherty, who explains how farmers in Wales reduce flooding with simple steps that Ireland has talked about for years, but has not yet managed to implement on a large scale. But first, the news in brief. Our first story concerns the government's new proposal for people in the international protection process who are in employment. The government is preparing a plan that would require employed asylum seekers to contribute between 10 and 40% of their weekly income towards the cost of their accommodation. Supporters say it is a fair contribution model. Migrant organizations warn that it risks creating hardship for people who are already facing long delays in securing working permits and who are often struggle to access stable employment. And not only that, they're also people who are likely fleeing conflict and seeking asylum in a country because they believe it's their best place to be in order to continue their lives. We stay with that same policy area for our next story. The Department of Integration says 22 contracts with asylum accommodation providers have been terminated this year after an expanded round of compliance checks. Issues included missing documentation, and providers are not meeting updated service standards like at Dundrum House. Opposition parties want an independent review of how these contracts are awarded and are monitored. They say unclear ownership structures, Jeff Leo, keep appearing across different sectors, and that the state should be far more transparent about who is receiving public money and where that is actually going. From accommodation policy, we now turn towards the environment, where Ireland's record has again come under scrutiny. No surprise there, unfortunately. The European Court of Justice has ruled that Ireland is in breach of several European Union directives on water quality. The judgment points to a persistent pollution in rivers, lakes, and coastal areas and highlights long-standing failures in enforcement and wastewater infrastructure. Environmental groups say that the decision confirms warnings that has been made for more than a decade. The government must now produce a rapid compliance plan or face the possibility of financial penalties. And finally, a difficult year for the technology sector. A new report shows that funding for Irish technology companies has declined by around 10% this year. Early stage firms have been especially affected, with investors becoming more cautious following several collapses and a broader global uncertainty. Enterprise Ireland is facing renewed questions about how public money is allocated and what protections exist when companies fail. Analysts expect fundraising conditions to remain challenging into the next year. And again, I've submitted 2 FOI requests to Enterprise Ireland, and hopefully we will hear from them today about them receiving those FOI requests. If not, then I have got to send chasers and then follow the legal proceedings in order to actually get the information. But as Keith said last week, we need to see where the money goes. And now I'm going to bring in Al to join us before our segments. So I'm not going to bring in Al to join us for our segments because Al is unfortunately not here yet. Al is back, so I'm now going to bring in Al. Hi, Al. How are you doing?
Hey, man. Yeah, having some technical gremlins today, Oscar.
No, it's cool. I'm also not sure I introduced myself, so I'm Oscar Verdi. In case I didn't do that one.
You did. You're doing very well, man. So, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. So, unfortunately for our regular viewers, Keith is off ill today, so I am now in the hot seat, and it's going really well. Al, where are you based in the world today, mate?
I'm in the US. So I was in New York yesterday for the Thanksgiving celebrations and parade and stuff. So that went well.
Lovely. Really glad to hear it.
So, yeah, nice vibe. Yeah. So it's early mid morning for me.
Oh dear. So, what did you think about that last one, where it's like a difficult year for the technology sector, given you work in that with where startups are struggling and there's going to be more struggles next year? Are you seeing that kind of thing in the landscape? I know you work in the industry.
Yeah, so I think if you went back to 6 months ago, maybe seven months ago, I started kind of mapping this out in relation to a crunch point that we were going to hit not just Ireland, but in general, in relation to contraction of technology industry, very competitive. I guess rumors around AI bubbles bursting, technology bursting, all this kind of, I guess, a bit of kind of negative hype, if I can say that kind of paradox term, right? Um, but I think there's a kind of a deeper underlying issue in Ireland, which is something we spoke to a lot, where you've got a delta between companies being able to secure significant funding at the start of the process. So early stage investment, seed investment, seems to be difficult. And then when companies get invested kind of in the next stage, they're not really getting access to supporting investors or passive investors, right? And in this kind of volatility, it's very important that you've got supportive investors and passive investors that are, you know, getting kind of the companies that have value in them to weather the storm, if I could use that kind of term, right? Okay. So definitely seen some issues in relation to that point where Ireland's getting a negative vibe around investment opportunity, investors not feeling the kind of the structures that are there to protect them and to protect the founders. The other point as well, I guess, is when you look at a macro level, so the macroeconomics of technology is always kind of turbulent anyway. So this is no surprise. So as soon as things start kind of moving towards a negative sentiment, it's difficult for technology companies then to grow because they're basing their growth path on investment essentially. A lot of tech companies would be front loaded R&D, get a product ready, get it to market. I saw a couple of articles coming out in relation to advice being given to startups. One guy in particular who we've spoken here in Lent about, which is DC Catalan and his buddy Charlie Taylor from the Business Post, pushing out articles telling companies to don't worry about building a product, do lots of marketing and then build what a customer needs. That's just suicide, right?
Yeah.
You're falling into the chasm then of marketing blurb, BS, buzzword mania, and then investors see through that. Any sophisticated investors, let me use that word very, very facetiously, would see through that with a pane of glass, you know?
Yeah, I get you. So, just in like one sentence, what would your best advice be to a potential investor in a a founder in a startup in the technology sector in Ireland right now? Like, if you had to give them one small bit of advice, what would it be?
Build a good team around you that can support you. Make sure that your product is a market fit. So when you're building technology, you have to make sure that you're very focused and you go deep into a domain where you can see a noticeable path to traction. And companies need to change their plan in terms of how they're treating the next few years from an investor perspective, because investors are going to be looking at the adaptability of the technology, the adaptability of the team, the experience of the team to be able to scale. So surround yourself with the correct people, build a strategy. Not popular for saying that, but strategy trumps culture every time.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, my dad's always said that, like, you need to find it's easy to find a gap in the market, but you also need to see if there's actually a market in that actual gap, and like strategy and building a good team around you in that area is definitely the best advice. Thanks so much for that, Al. So I'm not sure if you've seen this on the news, but did you see any flooding in around North Kerry over the week?
Heard it indirectly, yes.
Yeah. So there was a woman in North Kerry who spent last week watching her home disappear under a rising moat of brown water, pumps running all night, sandbags stacked, and everything done right, but it was still not enough. She told the Kerryman that the water was surrounding the house, moving closer every hour. Not a once in a century storm, not a freak event, just another winter in a county that's drowning earlier and often. Roads are cut off, fields are gone, livestock are stranded, and a homeowner standing at her front door, frightened, watching the water creep toward the walls like something alive. We talk about climate change like it's a future problem, but in Kerry, the future shows up at 4 in the morning when a pump fails and you don't have a backup. These people are living in the world the rest of us still describe in hypotheticals. And that's why this matters. It's not because it's shocking, but but because it isn't anymore, Kerry isn't a warning sign. It's an example of what happens when adaptation is delayed until there's nothing left to adapt to. But before we go any further with this segment, and before we get into COP30 and targets and declaration, here's something lighter, but also not. We're going to play a clip from Futurama because honestly, it explains a lot better than I can about what climate change actually is and explains why COP climate meetings matter more than most official speeches do. And just to be clear here, I said COP30, not COPs, although given how governments are behaving at these summits, maybe a few arrests wouldn't hurt. So long before the climate conferences become annual events with jet lags and lanyards, Futurama was already warning about melting ice caps and political disasters. And here's the clip.
Global warming, or none like it hot. You're probably wondering why your ice cream went away. Well, Susie, the culprit isn't foreigners, it's global warming.
Global wobble?
Yeah. Meet Mr. Sunbeam. He comes all the way from the sun to visit Earth.
Hello, Earth. Just popping in to brighten your day. La 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 la. And now I'll be on my way.
Not so fast, Sunbeam. We're greenhouse gases. You ain't going nowhere.
Oh, ah, oh, ah, oh, oh, God, it hurts.
Pretty soon, Earth is chock full of sunbeams. They're rotting corpses heating our atmosphere.
How do we get rid of the greenhouse gases?
Fortunately, our handsomest politicians came up with a cheap, last-minute way to combat global warming. Ever since 2063, we simply drop a giant ice cube into the ocean every now and then.
Just like Daddy puts in his drink every morning. And then he gets mad.
Of course, since the greenhouse gases are still building up, it takes more and more ice each time. Thus solving the problem once and for all.
But...
Once and for all!
And we're back. So, what do you think? That kind of approach to solving global warming, dropping a giant ice cube in the ocean, or?
I'm going to get myself in trouble with this segment for sure.
I mean, it's absolutely fine. That's what we're here for.
I think that, look, for me, COP30 just seems to be, it's kind of like I heard one investor refer to, like it's like standing by and watching the house bursting into flames, and everybody's kind of talking about what they should do with a fire extinguisher and how big the fire extinguisher should be, right? I think that the fundamental issue is the balance between, okay, there's a plan in place and you're achieving milestones, and the moot point to that is, are those milestones even achievable? Will they ever be achieved with lack of commitment from both sides in terms of the practicality of the budget that's actually needed, right? Then will you look at it in terms of tangible opportunities or business opportunities, which we just referred to around the technology, right? I do have a very close friend of mine who's very deep in this space, and they've come up with an extremely novel technology that he believes, and I'm going to make this a balanced statement. He believes he's able to solve the conversion of carbon, right? Okay, he's developed a patented device, essentially to describe it. They're mechanical trees, okay, right?
Okay.
And it's a company called Carbon Collect. And I've watched them closely over the last number of years. And back to the earlier point, to stitch it to the topic that we just mentioned around technology and the opportunity in Ireland. What's happened again? Same 101 problem. Cannot get any support within Ireland to get this done. So we're fantastic at documenting stuff to say there's a problem. But then when it comes to actually executing a plan, there's no support for it. The financial teeth is not there. The system isn't in place to actually execute it. We seem to be very efficient at building IPAS centers that make a lot of money for a lot of people, but very inefficient at doing anything that seems to be a global strategy or plan, right? Okay. I think the other part that's really becoming counterintuitive is there's a lot of industry being impacted by the let's call it the harshness of COP30 in terms of its implementation plan. So, but there's no real balance. So when you're affecting business and commercial activity, but you don't really have a plan as to how that's sustainable, pardon the pun, for the sustainability of business, that's when you're going to head into adoption and adoption errors.
Yeah.
And I guess the best way to kind of word it is kind of resistance, right? Everybody's resisting, and this is back to all the conversations that we're having here, which is everything seems to be left or right. There's no in the middle. It's like you're either a support of this and you think it's going to happen, or you're on the other side and you think it's never going to happen. It's all bullshit.
Mhm.
There's no actual in the middle practicality of, okay, but what is the plan for going forward to say, here's achievable milestones? Do you know the way I describe it? We have 4 children, right? So if I said to my kids, I want you to hit this bar, and until you hit this bar, I'm not going to love you, I'm not going to reward you, I'm going to keep telling you over and over again, here's the bar you need to achieve. That achieve is unsurmountable and you're never going to achieve it. What happens? They don't keep thriving to try to achieve it. They're just surviving, so they just say, fuck it, I'm not going to achieve it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's what's happening. That's my best way of brutally describing the performance of everybody, including the people that say they're achieving stuff, in terms of actually setting out a plan. I think the lack of science to support what they're saying and the credibility around the plan is questionable.
I just want to ask, what stops your friend? So he's got these mechanical trees that works. What stops him from moving that company over to somewhere like Scandinavia, where you've got better investment in like renewables? So in that kind of environment, is it because he wants to do business in Ireland, or?
I can't speak on his behalf, but I think he's already done that. I think he's either done it or already done it. Yeah.
So that's like potentially millions for the Irish economy, just kind of lost because there's no investment.
Billions.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been like this guy is I probably have to ask his permission or he'd kick my ass, but he's a phenomenal business guy. I mean, he's invested he's invested mass amounts of his own personal time into trying to help Ireland in export trade agreements, supporting the government. I think he was an advisor to one of our previous Taoiseach and Prime Minister, right? So he's a demonstrative business guy, and just seeing the lack of like intuition to support it has just been extraordinary, you know. I think when you look at the opportunity for Ireland is, and I'm speaking selfishly from Ireland, is, and I keep maintaining this point, there's a lot of smart builders, inventors in Ireland.
Mhm.
And they could solve this very, very quickly with focus, but it just cannot get the support, you know?
Yeah. So if we look at your own business, you have Altada that didn't get any investment, didn't get the correct investment, and you had investors back out. Then you have Synoptica, where the entire company was, again, similar story to Altada, where there was not enough investment in that area. And now you've got this other example. So that's where you're having 3 examples. So there's a pattern growing here where tech startups, which can actually improve the Irish economy, are not being funded, or are just having funding completely disappear and then being taken over. Would you agree?
Yeah. So there's 2 different tracks, right? So one is, as you said, the money has a smell, right? Okay.
Yeah.
There's the correct investment, but there's timing of investment. There's terms in relation to the investment, right? Okay.
Mhm.
So if you've got a scenario where, and Altada is a prime example, which is investment came in, we didn't have any difficulty raising money outside Ireland, actually, and then people started investing within Ireland. So our issue in Altada was there was triggers along the way in relation to investors had a different agenda. So when they're investing money, they're investing with something else in their mind, to get access to the technology, to get access to the team, get access to the patents, and essentially architecting a hostile takeover from a very, very early stage, right? Okay. Again, the guys in Synoptica, the same position, right? So they've taken investment, it's onerous, And then at some stage, a trigger is pulled where the investors can move and push a company into a process where the ultimate end result is the company ends up in a very bad situation from a PR perspective, from a corporate governance perspective. And when you're in an insolvency process, that then invariably makes you uninvestable, right? Okay. And then you're on the back foot all the time. But the bigger point really, Oscar, is like for anybody who's actually started a company and built a startup from ground up, right? And, I'm speaking to what we achieved in relation to getting the company up to that status of, global expansion, scaling, getting into a position where it's unicorn, 260 million independent valuation was our last official valuation before we went to market, which was the unicorn terminology, right? Okay. And anybody who started a company would appreciate it's really fucking difficult to get a company scaling, get a new product. Remember that we built a product from ground up, a brand new product, patents, not been done before, AI in an industry where, you're talking 2016, 2017, 2018, when, nobody was talking about AI. Everybody's talking about AI, right? And you're trying to build a business, but all the time you're building the business, this stuff is a distraction. So you can't focus, right? So it's the same for a lot of the founders that end up in a situation where they're spending too much time and resources on trying to fundraise, trying to capital raise, trying to build a business, trying to make decisions. And then you've got interference and, malicious interference from would-be investors and people that should be supporting the business, right? So it's the entire structure is asleep at the wheel, right? And look, if you get into other markets, UK, US, there's policies in place to protect companies from bad actor shareholders. There's policies in place to make sure that the company's been stimulated correctly, right? Okay. So then when you've got the trade-off between investors are also on the other side putting on their hat, right? And I have invested in a lot of businesses, right? Is, they have protections as well around their own money, right? Excuse me. So they have the ability to protect their own investment. Sorry, excuse me. From a perspective of loss, right? Tax incentives, they can write off a certain amount of the investment. They're supported in terms of their own financial position. So it works out for everybody because I like it's counterintuitive to think that, the amount of people that lose reputational wise from bad act investors, companies failing, technology going out the other side. There's always carnage, right? There's probably one person, right? And, I've heard the statement before saying life is unfair. It's fair in relation to somebody gets the outcome they're looking for and somebody else doesn't. And that's it, right? And when that starts to create and seep into an ecosystem, what happens is you end up in a position where the sentiment starts to negatize, the stimulus starts, kind of, I guess, disintegrating and degrading, and then you end up in a position where it's a contracting market. Sentiment is low. Founders then are struggling to keep the company going from an investment perspective, and investors will not invest in that kind of market. So that climate ends up just being a complete shit show for everybody,
Amazing. Yeah. Speaking of a shit show of a climate, the official outcome at the Belém Declaration, which is a renewed global commitment to keep the 1.5 degree temperature rise target alive, which updated the national climate plans for 2035 and put more focus on adaptation and support for vulnerable countries. On paper, it's ambitious. In practice, it's familiar because, as the IISD analysis puts it, this was another COP meeting delivering promises without delivery, full of phrases like accelerate action and enhance ambition, and, as you put it, trying to hold a fire extinguisher up and discussing the best way to use it during a house fire. So the leaders acknowledged the science, reaffirmed the urgency, and repeated the need to protect frontline communities. But as the gap between what they say and what they do remains enormous, the planet doesn't take minutes from these meetings. Ireland arrived in Belém with its own credibility problem. We are not on track for 2030 targets, we're overrunning on carbon budgets, and the Climate Change Advisory Council has been blunt. Without major policy shifts, the numbers simply won't add up. Irish officials spoke about ambition and climate finance, but back home, communities like Kerry are building makeshift defensive around their homes and praying that pumps don't burn out. So while COP30's language matters politically, Ireland's lived reality matters more, and that's what we care about here more at Moth News, right? We care more about the individual, everyday people. So,
I think a quote that I saw, I'd put it up actually because I'd want to do an injustice, was from Johan Rockstrom, director of Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research, and he said literally that the COP30 event essentially achieved nothing. That's essentially what he said, right? And I think a very interesting perspective is the technology pathways exist, but the political will does not match the science requirements.
Yeah, and that's what you're seeing a lot of the time whenever it comes to something like this. Because like it's not like climate change is a new problem. It's been happening for like 30, 40 years. Like this is the 30th COP, and it's always the same problem where like you don't have enough political will to fund change because nobody wants to lose the carbon emissions.
I think it's very difficult to find balance, Oscar, when you just have, again, it's something we're banging the drum on a lot, right? You just have such a lack of confidence in the political landscape at the moment, right? Where no matter what they tell you or instruct you to do, there's an element of disbelief or cynicism, right? It's if somebody keeps telling you something without credibility, you just stop listening, right? So it's like they have no credibility in terms of how they're managing things in general. And you can see why, there's larger nations globally are starting to pull back and say, you know what, this just feels like a big fucking scam, a big financial scam. They're not backing it up with any willpower. There doesn't seem to be any will to do it, and it just seems to be, penalizing businesses with taxes, and they're happy to do that, but actually generally don't have a plan at all, I think that's the consensus,
100%. And the good news is, if you feel like the Irish government doesn't have a plan for actual climate change, there is currently several legal cases going on against the Irish government over their climate crisis. And to be clear, absolutely from the start, these cases are not new. They are part of a long-running effort reported by the Irish Times, RTE, Irish Legal News, and the Irish Independent to force the state to follow its own climate laws that it has enacted. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled that the government's climate plan was too vague and aspirational to be lawful. Coverage then dominated the news cycle across all major outlets. Since then, further challenges have been brought to the High Court, arguing that Ireland's revised climate action plan still does not meet the legal standard required under the Climate Act. The Irish Times and the Irish Legal News both reported that the plan failed to set out a credible pathway for meeting Ireland's legally binding carbon budgets. The applicants argue that the plan lacks detail, lacks credibility, as you said, and puts people's constitutional rights, life, bodily integrity, housing, dignity at risk. And they argue that the state is also breaching its EU obligations. Context matters here. Ireland is off track. The EPA and the Climate Change Advisory Council have warned repeatedly that the pace of emissions reduction is nowhere near what the law now requires. So what this means for everyday people is that when communities in Kerry face floods, when families lose homes, when farmers watch land become unusable, the courts become the only place where the state can be compelled to act. The government says it will robustly defend the plan, again reported by the Irish Times. But if the plan doesn't meet the legal requirement, the court can order it to be rewritten. Climate action is now in Ireland as much a legal story as a political one, because when promises fail, people turn to the courts. So, Al, I've just got like a couple of questions for you here. When you look at what's happening in Kerry, repeated flooding, basic maintenance failures, people left to fend for themselves, what does that tell you about Ireland's actual level of climate preparedness?
Well, look, I think there's kind of a pattern of recurring events, isn't there? We've got river valleys, coastal areas, mountain passes, towns that are getting hit continually over and over again. And I think the frequency and the severity of these events is, I guess it's underpinning. There's a country that's heavily dependent on tourism and agriculture, right? Okay, and infrastructure. This is escalating at a point where that's going to impact everything, right, in relation to recovery. So the economic impact of, I guess, what the people are experiencing is going to start coming out in a very short period of time in relation to, how our company is going to be supported to recover, right? We've got like issues with insurance, businesses that are considered in high risk areas that are continually being hit by coastal flooding will struggle to get any kind of insurance protection, right? Okay. You've got reports of rising sea levels. Actually, I do have skin in the game. I have invented a technology that is able to calculate fluctuations in rivers in real time, right? In terms of alerts. I can't speak to too much in terms of the project, but it is going to be released in 2026. But I think the convergence of weather patterns, the threat to residential and commercial opportunities, right, and businesses, just demonstrates the lack of planning again, right, in relation to alerts, recovery. What are the anecdotal plans that can be put in place to prevent this from happening, right? I think it was Storm Bert was one of the worst ones that hit last year. And again, I think the kind of the level of rain damage that occurred in November has just started to kind of highlight the fact that the vulnerable areas that are being impacted by this have no protection whatsoever or support. That's using this in a broad kind of statement, right? I think my viewpoint on it, again, it's back to what we discussed many times, where this is another failure for Irish citizens, right? And you can just see the level of frustration building and around this. So look, when you've got lack of leadership, this is not a surprise that nobody's going to be finding any answers on this anytime soon.
Yeah. And would you say that lack of leadership is the main issue here, not people's preparedness to take efforts into trying to mitigate floodwater risk?
Well, you see, if you don't have the support, it's next to impossible. I mean, if you don't have, or if you're not organized, right? I mean, you could have, let's say, I'm knowing Cork and Kerry people who are bloody resilient, right? I've no doubt that you've got people independently trying to solve this for their own businesses and homes and protect themselves. But if you don't have a plan at a macro level and you don't have the support to recover, I mean, look, you're going up against Mother Nature without being facetious, right? Like you're trying to prevent yourself from falling into a crisis which you have no control of whatsoever. So if there's nobody planning at a top level to say, okay, if we've missed this and something happens, how we recover from it, this is our plan, and triage it, right? It's like walking into the children's hospitals at the moment. It's like, okay, we're trying to solve the healthcare for children in Ireland for how fucking long, and here we are with a crisis again around the children's hospital. There seems to be issue after these guys, right? And I go back to the point again, but they have no problem finding millions upon millions to support IPAS centres in Ireland, which is just ridiculous fucking behaviour. So if this was commercialised to the point that there was people going to make a lot of money from helping the citizens to avoid this damage, you could be guaranteed there'd be stampede of companies solving this.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. We do have some level of practical solutions that we can take on an everyday basis, though. Fortunately, they're kind of small scale. So presenting these is going to be John Doherty. He's the agricultural community animator with Inishowen Rivers Trust. He's a sustainable agriculture graduate from Dunlac IT and a certified FAS advisor. And he previously managed the Inishowen Uplands EIP, a project proving that small nature-based measures can actually reduce flood risks. He also works directly with farmers on practical actions that they can receive grants for: hedgerow planting, field margin restoration, slowing water before it hits towns. And I originally spoke to John while reporting on Ireland's failure to meet EU water quality and climate-linked water standards. His message was clear: Ireland doesn't actually have a shortage of solutions, it has a shortage of implementations. And as you've said, it's a shortage of implementations at a political level. So here's the clip from John.
The Pontbrennan in Wales was a very interesting project where a group of farmers got together and decided to improve their own circumstances and planted more hedges, more trees, used a lot more of the trees for the likes of bedding cattle, and they helped bring native animals back into their own farm, and all this had a massive impact on the flooding retention in the upland areas for the local towns in that area too. So there's a lot of impacts that can develop from farmers planting across slopes and slowing that flow going down the rivers. A metre of hedging can hold back 180 litres of water. So in a heavy rainfall event, it's a lot of water that can be held back in the upland or the further back up the catchments. And then you have less impact on towns downstream, especially if you have overflows from sewage treatment plants where if they get 30 minutes continuous rain, they have an overflow where sewage treatment will run out. So again, if you can hold more water back from those catchments, you might have less impact on sewage treatment overflows. And it's about encouraging people to put in things in these farms that'll help.
Really practical solutions there from John. And that's where the key difference is, that there are everyday aspects that farmers, that local landowners can take, such as planting hedges. You saw it in Wales, where farmers planted hedges, slowed the water, protected towns. Simple, supported, and effective. And also, again, you can, if you're a farmer, you can actually reach out for grants in order to take measures that will reduce your impact on the climate. Meanwhile, in Kerry, we've somehow managed the exact opposite. The homeowner that told the Kerry man that after the council cut the hedges near her home, they left the debris in the stream. She said it looks like a beaver dam, a pile of twigs and branches blocking the flow and pushing the floodwater higher. So instead of slowing the water upstream like Wales did, they actually managed to build a blockage downstream and a flood prevention measure that literally made the flooding worse. Only in Ireland could hedge-cutting become accidental hydraulic engineering, just in the wrong kind of way. So people in Kerry aren't asking for miracles, they're asking not to be frightened in their own home. And while COP30 debates ambition, and while court cases fight over legality, the truth is simple. We already know what works. Wales did it, John projects show it, farmers here want to do it, Ireland just actually needs to actually deliver. Until then, the pumps will keep running through the night, and the future everyone keeps talking about will keep arriving at people's doors, one flood at a time. Now, Al, over to you. What are you bringing to us this week?
Where do I start with our dick of the year? We've a birthday celebration coming up as well, Oscar. So we'll have to might do a bit of a polling around the dick of 2025, right?
Yeah.
Look, you and I have discussed this as well, online and offline. So I think the conclusion on our prediction or our kind of, exclusive that we've, excuse me, the throat is a bit wonky today.
Manuka honey helps, mate.
I think it's just from cheering.
Nice.
As they say in the Christmas movies, I was making merry.
Oh dear.
Nothing too extraordinary, but the couple of pints of Guinness to celebrate, right? But the I think the end of this process, or the start of this process, has obviously been a small bit disappointing in relation to an individual that we've been kind of discussing for quite some time, has now blatantly taken the stand in court, literally told porcupines, his team have told porcupines. The media have been disappointing. The legacy media have been disappointing how they've reported on it. So it's proving everything we've said from the very beginning correct, right? To be correct, which is there's still an element of insulation for people that just, are heading in the grey and in the red all the time, which is corruption, right? So as you know, Jeff Leo took the stand on a number of occasions over the last week or so, mid last week, and I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday. 2 days, so I ended up on one day finishing off his discussion around his behavior, which was nothing less of just pointing the finger at the person. It's like pointing your finger at the victim and saying it's your fault, you made me do it. It's your fault for trusting me. What else was I supposed to do, right? I mean, it was too tempting to take all the money. Just if you read between the lines. So basically, he said it's their fault. They instructed me to do it urgently, to take all their money. They instructed me to liquidate the company. They instructed me to do this. So I just set up a process where Ireland was so easy to enable me to do it that I just went in, liquidated the company, moved out all the assets, took them into my own name on instruction, and just decided to rip them off because they asked me to do it.
Yeah,
Right?
it's just a pattern that keeps emerging with this guy. And to me,
Well, not just this guy, with Ireland, right?
to me, it looks like if you look at least on the IPAS side, where you've had like 22 bodies have 22 IPAS companies aren't able to run their houses anymore because they've had government funding removed. It seems like the Irish government's trying to play catch up almost. Do you feel like that's the same kind of way, or?
Look, I did speak to. I cannot disclose the source, but I can speak to a situation where somebody reached out to me and said they had invested heavily in creating a proper facility.
Yeah.
Okay, and they took it upon themselves. So I want to make sure that we're bringing balance here, right? We're not just saying that everybody who's trying to help to house people in need is in the same category as this guy, right?
Yeah.
And this person reached out to me and said, look, I don't want you to mention my name, but you can speak to it in relation to just giving you the balance of things, right? Okay. And actually, they are in the same area of focus as Leo, right? Which is in that general area. So their IPAS center could have competed successfully for that bid, right? And the reason they contacted me was the frustration for them was they're following the process in relation to ensuring that everything's up to date, that the property has proper planning, they've invested heavily in it. On the back of, they were pretty much given a commitment that they would have support from the government to set up this facility. Okay, right?
Mhm.
Boring story short, Oscar, didn't happen. They didn't get the contract, right? So they'd invested all this money, and then they're watching this guy who has, admitted, right? He may have not taken responsibility for it, but his team have admitted that he'd failed to do tax returns in 6 years, that he had not followed the correct planning procedures, that there was an element of corruption in relation to the award, and then secondly, he was able to then get the contract awarded a second time into a shell company that he had vigorously and aggressively defended, saying he had no involvement in it, and then it came out that he was involved in the new company that was awarded the contract, right? And they were saying that in relation to this individual getting this contract and defending it successfully, how is it that he was even awarded that contract in the first place? And how is it that he was awarded a contract of that significance in the first place? So it begs a question again, which goes back to the point, right? How is Ireland able to defend its position as a credible country in relation to, conducting business when you've got guys like that can just get run riot, and the same rules do not apply to everybody, right? Okay. And I think that's the fundamental problem. So then you have to look at, okay, are the government trying to recover from it? I have heard from, again, few sources within government that there is a focus to try and resolve the corruption in relation to these awards, and there is a number of people that are just tired of the negative issue around this topic, right? Because Oscar, what we're not looking at is the global impact of sentiment again towards Ireland, right? Like I was saying this many times, over and over again, I'm getting people, Irish diaspora people mentioning to me what is going on in Ireland, what is happening in Ireland. My first cousin just came back. They went to Dublin. It's a fucking disaster. They were traveling around. It's Ireland has gone into a part of what's the story with all the riots? What's the story with the fucking contempt towards foreigners? And we're just ending up in a situation where when there's disorganization, when there's chaos, when people are working in a vacuum, the only thing that gets out really is fucking negativity. That's the problem. And I think, look, the measures that are being taken now, even though we welcome them in terms of, progress is good. But again, it's just too little too late, in my opinion, right? They need to go right back to the basics of why did this happen? How is this happening? And just bring it to a fucking halt to allow the country to recalibrate. And we do need to get back into state of recovery. And as you said earlier, at the start of the show, right? It's coming out now in terms of issues with investment, the technology sector, which is a huge part of Ireland, right? FDI is a huge part of Ireland's income in terms of economic welfare of the country. Indigenous businesses being impacted by flooding, macro issues, economic issues. So like that's all heading to a very distressed state, you know.
Yeah. And then with your friend that you can't speak to off record, did you manage to ask him, like, when he was applying for the IPAS Center accounts, I imagine he had to submit some form of his own accounts, correct?
You don't even get past the first mandatory field is upload your tax clearances. Like, so like everybody's just absolutely fucking, it's boggling. It's mind boggling. And it's mind boggling that a liquidator who's seen as a credible liquidator can also, you know, step in and with a fucking, with a, you know, straight face represent this guy in a liquidation that was to remove assets out of the company. I mean, it's just fucking crazy. I don't know how, you know, it's taken this long to catch up with this guy, you know. And again, it's just it's guys like this, and he's not the only one, are being, you know, they're tarnishing the guys that actually are trying to build a business and help, you know.
And like with that, with the IPAS centers, there's obviously a need there, right? And we've spoken before about how personally I believe this should be a not-for-profit industry. How do you feel is the best way to actually vet people receiving these grants? Because obviously the process is broken.
I mean, from top down, you have to make sure that they're credible people that don't have a fucking hidden agenda. Secondly, make sure that actually they do own the businesses that they're setting up as IPAS centers. I mean, this guy, you know, again, going back to the point in relation to Jeff Leo, you know, it was a property that was in dispute since 2022, right? The company was in liquidation since 2022, right? I think it's a governing body to make sure that this process is not being manipulated and used for different purposes, you know.
Definitely agree. So should we wrap up with an and finally?
What, sorry?
With an and finally?
And finally, yeah.
Anything?
Let you do it, man. You're doing an extremely good job. Come on,
Okay,
you stepped into the hot seat.
Yeah, so basically, there's this format that we're trying to do where we're asking people to hopefully submit some of their and finally, so like some stories about them that kind of are funny. So this is my last one, hopefully. So how do you feel about mushrooms, Al?
Depends which ones.
Regular eating mushrooms.
Oh, we love them.
You love mushrooms. Awesome. Okay. So I grew up in the sticks, and then every single year my mum would go out and pick mushrooms kind of around this time of year, and they'd have them like for breakfast, whatever. So, and then bearing in mind we've lived in the same house for 20 years, so you'd kind of guess at this point my mum's figured out which are the good mushrooms, right? So
you would hope so.
So my mum goes out on, I think, goes out in the morning on the dog, walks the dogs, picks up the mushrooms, and takes them back to the house. And then my dad like cooks them for breakfast, and then they have them. And this is a really crucial detail. My dad's colorblind, so he can't tell the color of mushrooms, which is kind of important when you are cooking them. So then he gets in the car, goes off to the golf course, and then my mum starts going about her day. My dad gets about halfway to the course, and then kind of guess what happens?
Don't know.
So he just has to pull over because it turns out these are poisonous mushrooms, and then he starts throwing up and out the other end as well. Gets home. Meanwhile, I'm in London, about 2 hours away from the house, and we've got like a family friend staying at the house, and all I get is like a phone call saying that your mum's called an ambulance, you need to get home now. And there's like 3 hospitals around me, and I have no idea which one they're at. So I jump like on a couple of trains, get an Uber because I'm 16 at the time and I can't drive, get home, and then I find my dad like half kind of dying in the bathroom, and then I can't find my mum anywhere. So I grab my dad, get on the phone with a couple of family friends, and then get him eventually into the car. And then after my dad's in the car, I then have to take my parents to hospital. And I'm not entirely sure if you're familiar with NHS waiting times, but they're not the best. So imagine me there, this kind of not very outspoken, timid little 16-year-old, politely asking these doctors and nurses, number one, where are my parents? Number two, could you please actually get my dad a hospital bed because I think he's going into renal failure, and there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. So finally, like after about an hour and a half, I find my mom. She's in a hospital bed, and like I get my dad from the A&E waiting room, drag him up into see my mom, hoping that he'd be able to like cope and handle stuff. Turns out that my dad's still not doing well, so he just collapses in the same hospital bed and ends up with both of them hooked up to 2 different sets of IVs while being sat in the same hospital bed. But the good news is now, for the first year ever, thanks to West Streeting, we have a decrease in NHS waiting times. So,
What kind of mushroom? I know we're finishing up. What kind of mushrooms were they, man? Jeez, that sounds fucking
they were
extraordinary.
apparently called Devil's Bilitis or something like that. My mum's told me, but it's kind of put me off mushrooms for life.
But they're okay. They're okay now, right?
Yeah, they're
Obviously.
okay. They're okay now. But like this is
So we can like have a light-hearted
yeah,
conversation.
absolutely. Like through the whole thing of my dad being colorblind, my mum having a cold, not able to smell the mushrooms. It was just like one bad thing after the next, and I'm just there like, what the hell is going on? But
I do have a mushroom story, but
you have a mushroom story.
Maybe I'll share it the next time. We had a slightly different experience where my brother decided to gather up magic mushrooms and make a pot of tea, and didn't tell anybody that the pot of tea was magic mushrooms. When we were teenagers, so that ended up being a very fun 2 days for everybody involved, and that became kind of his thing. Every time we were, anytime we were heading out somewhere, he would decide to do something funky with brownies and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I do have a couple of funny stories on mushrooms.
Yeah,
but I didn't know that they could make you that unwell. I guess it makes sense, right? If there's poisonous mushrooms mixed up.
yeah, with fungi, you've got to be really careful. Like, there's these 2 guys that wrote a book about like mushrooms that you can and can't eat, and then went out and tried to survive on mushrooms that you can and can't eat, and then unfortunately passed away from eating the wrong kind of mushrooms.
What?
Yeah, I'll try, I'll try and find the article at some point. But it's like they write a book about this is safe to eat, this is not safe to eat. Then they go and try and live off the land, and then they don't follow their own instincts, and then they pass away. So. Word of advice, guys, if you're surviving in the wilderness, be really careful of which mushrooms you're picking up, because at best they might make you really high for a couple of days. At worst, they might make you pass away. But on a lighter note, it's Black Friday, so are you buying anything nice this year? Or?
No, I might just head over to see the experience, because it's I can't recall. Maybe it's just I'm not. Maybe it was not lack of awareness, but I can't recall if I have been in the US for official Black Friday. So I might just have a cruise around to see is the madness as mad as what they make out to be. So I might do that for crack. But
well, it's going to be like a hallmark.
I'm not a big shopping dude, man. I wear the same black t-shirts and hats.
That's awesome. All right, okay. So. Yeah. That's all from Moth News today. We're going to let you guys go and have a great weekend and have a great Black Friday. And we'll be back here same time next week, around 11, hopefully at 11. And we'll see you then. Thank you very much. Goodbye. I've been Oscar Verdi, and this has been Al. Ta-ta for now.